How do you not get coarse after a night out? Because I find my voice always gets like
hoarse.
Like I get cotton mouth. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is quite frankly, this was a huge problem for me as well, and for many years, because particularly with this job, because we would. You know, we would land in a city and we would do this event, and then we would go immediately out to do in-field trainings. Like we were out at the club and I'm like yelling at people and bellowing and hollering and all of these things. And then I'd have to come to a seminar on Saturday all day, and then on Sunday, and then I'd literally have to go to the airport. My voice would be so shredded that I literally I couldn't even speak to the cab driver. This is like before Uber, right? I'd literally be like, the guys would be like, where do you go? I don't know what accent that is, but I'm sure it's offensive to somebody. And I'd be like, airport. Like I'd have to like pantomime a plane taking off. I'd be like, oh, I got you. It'd take me to the airport. So this was quite frightening to me because it's like my moneymaker. You know, this is how I like my profession. It'd be like a stripper losing her boobs or something like this. You know, and like so it's very concerning. And so I had to learn how to actually project my voice in a way where I could do it over time and number one, have it be healthy, and number two, still have it be attractive, or like the tone quality was still such that it was like pleasant and compelling. Because you can be loud if you yell. What's the conventional wisdom on this? They're like, okay, if you want to talk loud. And by the way, how many people in here struggle with being heard over the music at a club? You know, like you go up there like, what? The thing is, if they have to say what to you, if you are trying to introduce yourself to people and they have to say what even once, it's probably done, because that first impression has been made that this person can't project properly. Even in situations where I've gone out and like, it's the beginning of the night, so I haven't kind of calibrated to that. And I go up and I'm like, hey, good evening. And they're like, what? I'm like, oh, right. Hey, did it? And I fix it. The damage is done. They're like, fucking loser. Get the fuck away. Like, it's done. So it's very, very important. Now, there's a couple little tricks that you can employ. The most basic would be if you kind of increase the pitch of your voice a little bit, right? You see how I just did that very subtly? I kicked it up like one note maybe. That in and of itself can be enough to kind of like cut through the bass, because that's what you're really trying to do, especially in like a club. You're trying to cut through the bass noise. So that can be helpful, but you know, if I do it here like this, it sounds distinctly different and unusual. But if you're doing it in in the actual club, it just kind of blends in and doesn't sound that weird. But that's not going to help you. Over time, this is going to deteriorate because it's made out of meat. Do you understand? It's the vocal folds, the laryngeal folds. It's fucking meats vibrating against each other all night. So the problem, yeah, no.
You did that for yourself.
Yeah, I said it's fucking meat vibrating against each other, bro. Like, yeah, so I can speak up here, and I'm sure you've heard Owen sometimes talking on videos where his shit sounds destroyed. The thing is, even with proper technique, there's a physical limitation. Like if I talk for 8 hours straight here, I might be okay. If I then come back and do another 8, it'll be destroyed. I'll need to take a couple of days off. So that's even with proper technique. Now, this of course then begs the question, what is proper technique? The conventional wisdom for vocal projection is what? Speak from the diaphragm. Speak from the diaphragm. The diaphragm's the muscle that like draws air into your lungs and pushes it out. So basically, like when people hear this, they start pushing air. So they're like, pushing air. Like if I push air, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm providing like an overabundance of air through, like a bellows going through the vocal folds, right? So that will work, but the problem with that, there's two issues. Number one, it's going to fuck it up. Number two, it sounds like you're yelling, and you don't want to have that. What you want is you want it to be a clear projection that's powerful, but it's also going to be, it's not going to damage the thing. So damage the apparatus. So number one, the very first thing, and people probably don't understand this, is your posture. right? So when I do vocal trainings, and even in the mentoring, before we get into a lot of like our projective exercises, the very first thing that we do is we run through a sequence of what's called Alexander technique. Now, you guys ever heard of Alexander technique? Show of hands. So what this is, it's sort of a psychophysiological training tool that was developed in the late 1800s by an Australian actor like Mel Gibson, slightly less anti-Semitic maybe, who was called F. Matthias Alexander. And what this guy did, he did Shakespearean monologues. And back then, as far as I'm aware, he didn't have any like electrical, amplification apparatus to project. So he literally just had to project to an amphitheater. And he noticed his voice was getting wrecked. So what he did, he went to various doctors. He's like, what's wrong with me? They're like, we can find nothing wrong with you. And he started observing himself as he was speaking in like three-way mirrors. And what he noticed is that up here, kind of where the skull sits on top of that first cervical vertebrae, his head was kind of going like this. He had it sort of like a curve here, and he was kind of going like this. And you see, even if I do it like that, you can hear there's kind of a pinched tonality, a different tonality to my voice, as opposed to going like this. So he realized it was his posture. Now, this makes sense if you think about, let's say, for example, a boxer, right? A boxer doesn't punch with the arm like that. Where does the power of the punch come from? From like the connection to the ground and the rotation. So it's all your connection to the ground. All projection, whether it's physical projection, well, this is physical projection as well, that's the foundation. The foundation for all external expression is your connection to the ground. So you want to develop an awareness, a certain proprioception of how the spine is aligned, because I think for most people, myself included, when I first started doing this stuff, it's just like, okay, there's like my neck, and then there's like my upper back and my lower back. You really don't have like a distinct awareness of all the vertebrae, how they line up, how they hold you up. And so, and then this is compounded by the fact that, young kids, they grow up, they have heavy backpacks, and this causes that posture to kind of become ingrained. If you sit at a desk for long periods of time, you're probably not in perfect posture. You might start off in perfect posture. For example, for me, I do a lot of video editing because that's the job, right? This stuff going out with the guys on the town, that's the fun part. That's like the fun part for me. You know what the job is? We're glorified fucking video editors. Okay, that's what we do. We sit in front of a computer and we go like this. So I might start out, then over time it's like, looking at the timeline, cut, paste, okay, add the effect, and it just becomes like this, right, if I'm not careful. And so this becomes ingrained, not to mention this little wonderful fucking satanic device in your hand. Tick-tock, take my little ticky-tockies. Yes, you got that. So this incorrect posture becomes ingrained. So you want to retrain yourself. Just, again, all this, it comes down to awareness. Like, again, like awareness of how all of this stuff is being inhibited, awareness of how the intellect is like acting as a bouncer for intuitive impulses. By the way, I think one of the best ways that you can improve access to free access to your intuitive resources so that intuition becomes an increasingly useful resource for you in your conversations is through the regular practice of meditation. Very, very simple. And again, it improves, it gives you a sort of coherent nervous system that allows you to access that better. Anything that brings awareness. Yoga is sort of like a physical meditation. And then some of these various exercises that we do, including this Alexander technique. In fact, we can even do a little. You want to do a little one? Let's do one. Okay, so everyone, so sit on your chair and like sit on. I want you to sit on the kind of the edge of the chair where you're like your sit bones, if you will, are kind of on the edge, and the feet are a little bit behind the knees. Okay, so what you're going to do, first of all, take your hands out in front of you like you're riding a motorcycle, soft fists, not like tight fists, soft. And then rock back on the sit bones, and that's going to round your lower back. Okay? And then lean forward in the upper back. And you should feel a stretch in the upper back. Again, these are gentle movements. You shouldn't be straining. Okay? Unbow, come to the middle of the sit bones. Raise your arms above your head. And then lower them. Now, when you do that, You may even feel a slight stretching or opening in the front face of the spine, almost kind of like a knuckle cracking, a gentle knuckle cracking. That's fine. Now, just looking at many of you, you already look like it's a more natural sitting position. Like it's more biomechanically natural. Like you're not as held, but it's just everything's sitting kind of how it's supposed to be. So let's let that new reality incorporate for a moment here. And then the next one that we're going to do, you're going to touch your shoulders like so. Same thing, we're going to rock back on the sit bones, rounding the lower back. Bow further in the upper back. Unbow, come to the middle of the sit bones, arms above the head. And then just lower those arms gently. Okay, you want to feel the chair being held up by the ground, feel yourself being held up by the chair. Release tension from the legs out away from you. Okay, the next one, we're going to cross our arms like this on the shoulders. Rock back on the sit bones, bow further in the upper back, same thing. And again, this is opening up in a slightly different way. Okay, then unbow, come to the middle of the sit bones, arms above the head. Down. So now we've opened up the front face and back face of the spine. Now we're going to work on some rotational aspects. Put your right hand out in front of you, palm down. Rock back on the sit bones, and I want you to gently reach across the body. And rock a little bit back further on the sit bones to kind of protect the lower spine, because the lower spine wants to twist more. And this should be a gentle motion. You shouldn't be like, yeah! Like, it should just be like, you know, you're just kind of reaching. Okay, return to neutral. Okay, left hand down, out, palm down, rock back on the sit bones, reach across the body again. And return to neutral. All right, now let's do this. Let's put your left foot on the ground on its side, like that. You're gonna put the right foot on top of it like that, okay? So they're like this, okay? Right hand out, palm up. Rock back on the sit bones again, rounding that lower spine. And then reach across gently. And as you do it this time, gently push down on the bottom foot with the top foot. And feel the spine lengthen into your head. Okay, return to neutral. Then you guessed it, the other side here. We're going to put the right foot on its side, left foot on top, left arm out, palm up. Rock back on the sit bones, rounding that lower spine. Gently reach across the body, pushing down on the bottom foot with the top foot to feel the spine lengthen into your head. Then return to neutral. Okay, so now, just kind of sit and just kind of feel yourself being held up. Put your hand on the top of your head and the crown of your head. And feel your head pushing into that hand. Like your head's pushing up into that hand, almost like there's like a string that's kind of gently pulling upwards. And release away. And then as you're imagining that, I want you to rock forward over your knees and come naturally to your feet. And that should seem very easy to get out of the chair. Okay? So now have a seat. Now that's one very simple sitting Alexander routine, if you will. Now, when I do that to people, a lot of people are like, okay, what the fuck is that? Who cares? Right, like what happened? What happened? The thing is, with these types of exercises, it's much like, you know, physical, like weight resistance training or something. The point is not that you're going to get some dramatic improvement after one iteration. Right? The idea here is over time, you're building, again, a better proprioception of how everything is aligned. Also, you're training yourself to get up naturally. And again, like one of the reasons that we do this one is so when you're 75 years old, you can get out of a fucking chair, right? You know, without, oh, heavens to Betsy, you know, like, but rather you can just boom. And I notice this kind of stuff because I've been doing this at least twice a week for maybe like 5 years. And like, I'll notice it in odd moments, like when I'm at the airport or something and I'm sitting in like one of those low chairs like this, and they're like, oh, you know, group 2 or whatever. I'm like, oh, pop, and I just like pop up because it's very like biomechanically natural. So what you're doing is you're building awareness. Everything's about awareness, 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 awareness. Awareness of the functioning of your physical being, awareness of the functioning of your mind, awareness of the functioning of your emotional processes, so you have more control over how much you become emotional, and when you become emotional, you have awareness of how when other people are becoming emotional or experiencing emotional episodes, and you can deal with that accordingly. You have complete control of your facial, the musculature of your face, your voice, your body, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the beginning, is just like developing. And for people who do Alexander over time, you might feel taller. You might move through environments with more kind of purpose and stride. It just looks as though, and again, to speak to what we were talking about earlier, you look kind of like you're more comfortable taking up space in the environment. You're less of like someone to be tooled with or something like that. So that's number one. Voice, get your posture down. So that's the foundation. What's the fuel of the voice?
Air.
Is the breath. So breath control becomes something that's very, very important, particularly in singing, but also in conversation. If you're trying to, again, modulate certain tonalities, and then we get into something called resonance, which is using, and we can get really deep on this stuff, but like, and I have a whole program on this, in fact, called RESONATOR, but about how to do tone production that goes pretty deep, but you know, it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But you know, using the oral cavity and the sinuses to generate kind of specific effects to project further. And then there's another thing that, and this is probably the most useful thing for you right now, would be what we call ring, or singer's formant, they call it. So what that is, it's basically around your voice box, you have a thick ring of muscle that's called the aryepiglottic sphincter. Okay, but right, everyone laugh it off. So, but I already said the meat vibrating against each other, so that pales in comparison. But basically what this does, it can act as a method of projecting your voice further. So let's say that you have a hose, okay? You turn the hose on, what happens? Water comes out, okay? What happens if you pinch the hose? It'll go flying in a pressurized stream. So what you're essentially doing is you can use that to actually, instead of pushing air, you can use it to direct the sound to the back. So when you hear Owen up here talking very loud, that's what he's doing, right? And that's why he's not going to burn his voice out. So again, you make sure your posture is good. You don't push air, right? Instead, direct it, and again, you can try to bounce it off your soft palate. But I would say the basic things for you: make sure your posture is good, don't push air, spray it, like pressurize it with the. Again, we could do exercises with this, and then last but not least, maybe kick the pitch up a little bit, and you know, for like a 5-minute answer to that, that's probably the best I can do right now. I mean, it's something you'd want to work on going forward, though, with more. Consistency, and then you get better at it. This program is designed to give you a process to open and sustain charismatic expression with increasing consistency. Remove the obstacles, isolate the skills, exercise them separately, then put them together in a more completely realized whole. How to speak to all the issues surrounding this interrelationship between intuitive and intellectual resources is arguably the most fundamental challenge facing anyone who's attempting to improve their communication skills.
So if you're looking to develop general charisma that you can apply across all areas of life, definitely check out Jeff's Charisma Mastery.